Hey everyone. America stands at a crossroads, a nation called to justice, yet trembling under the weight of its own choices. The winds of history whisper warnings, and the heavens watch with a heavy heart. The oppressed cry out, the unborn remain voiceless, and the nation teeters on the edge of consequence. America stands at a crossroads, a defining moment in history where the choices made today will echo for generations to come. The weight of these decisions is not merely political, but spiritual, moral, and deeply consequential. The nation has seen empires rise and fall, and history bears witness to the fact that no nation, no matter how powerful, is immune to the tides of judgment and renewal. The road ahead is not simply about policies, economics, or international influence. It is about the very soul of the nation, about whether the foundation on which it stands will hold or crumble under the weight of compromise and complacency. There are moments in history where a nation must pause and recognize that it is no longer just moving forward, but standing on the precipice of something far greater than itself. It is a moment when the collective conscience of a people must awaken to the reality that every action, every law, and every decree shapes not only the present, but the destiny of millions yet unborn. The crossroads is not just a metaphor, but a stark reality. The choices made today will determine whether the nation will experience renewal or decline, whether it will heed the lessons of the past or fall victim to them once more. The weight of leadership in such a time is not to be taken lightly. Leadership is not merely about authority or power, it is about responsibility, about carrying the burdens of a people with wisdom and integrity. In times of crisis, true leadership is tested, not in the moments of ease, but in the furnace of challenge and adversity. The responsibility of guiding a nation at a crossroads is not for the faint of heart, nor for those who would prioritize self-preservation over righteousness. Every leader must ask themselves whether they are making decisions that align with truth or whether they are bowing to the pressures of expediency and convenience. A nation does not lose its way overnight. It happens gradually, through small compromises, through the slow erosion of values, through decisions made with short-term benefits that neglect long-term consequences. The moment a nation begins to turn its back on foundational truths, it sets itself on a path that leads not to prosperity, but to destruction. It is not merely a matter of policy, but of principle. It is not merely about governance, but about the heart and soul of a people. There comes a time when a nation must ask itself what it truly stands for, what it values, and what it is willing to sacrifice in pursuit of power and progress. The warnings of history are clear for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Great civilizations before have stood at similar crossroads, facing the same choices between justice and corruption, between righteousness and moral decay. Some heeded the warnings and turned back before it was too late. Others ignored them, believing that their strength and wealth would shield them from the consequences of their actions. The pages of history tell of their downfall not because they lacked power or influence, but because they lost their moral compass. No nation is too great to fall, and no leader is too powerful to escape accountability before history and before God. The moral fabric of a nation is not held together by laws alone, but by the hearts of its people. When truth is disregarded, when justice is twisted to serve the interests of a few, and when the vulnerable are left unprotected, the very foundation of a society begins to crack. There is still a choice, still an opportunity to turn, but it requires humility, courage, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. The question remains whether the nation will choose the path of renewal or continue down the road of compromise. The call to justice has echoed throughout history, a cry that rises from the oppressed, the forgotten, and those whose voices have been silenced by systems of power and indifference. Justice is not merely a concept or an ideal, it is a divine mandate. a measure by which nations are weighed and leaders are judged. It is written into the very fabric of creation, an unshakable principle that cannot be ignored without consequence. Every civilization that has turned its back on justice has suffered the repercussions of its own neglect, for injustice tolerated at any level becomes a poison that spreads until it consumes the very structures meant to uphold society. The oppressed do not cry out in vain. Their voices rise like incense before the throne of eternity, bearing witness to the wrongs committed against them. The widow, the orphan, the refugee, the poor, the marginalized. These are not simply social categories, but human lives, each one bearing the image of God, each one with a story, a struggle, and a right to be heard. When a nation ignores their cries, when it prioritizes the powerful over the weak, when it builds structures that protect the interests of the elite while crushing the vulnerable, it moves itself closer to the edge of judgment. A society that values the rich over the righteous, the influential over the innocent, is a society that has already begun to unravel. Justice is not justice when it is selective. It cannot favor one group while oppressing another. It cannot be wielded as a tool for political gain while ignoring those who have no voice. The powerful may believe they are secure, that their positions and influence will protect them from accountability, but history has shown otherwise. Leaders who pervert justice for personal or political advantage may sit in high places for a time, but no throne, no office, no title can shield them from the weight of truth. The higher the position, the greater the responsibility, and the greater the reckoning when justice is denied. There is no greater injustice than the silencing of the innocent, no greater crime than to know the truth and yet refuse to act upon it. Silence in the face of injustice is itself an act of complicity. To turn away from those who suffer, to ignore the pain of the weak, is to align oneself with the oppressor. A nation that refuses to defend the defenseless is a nation that has lost its moral authority. It cannot claim to be a beacon of hope while allowing darkness to spread within its own borders. It cannot proclaim liberty while shackling the most vulnerable in chains of despair. The unborn remain voiceless. Their lives ended before they have even begun. The justice system, meant to uphold righteousness, too often bows to corruption, punishing the weak while protecting the guilty. The poor are left without defense, crushed beneath the weight of laws designed to serve those who can afford justice rather than those who need it most. The oppressed cry out, not merely for relief, but for the restoration of what has been taken from them, their dignity, their rights, their very humanity. And their cries do not go unheard. The judgment of history is severe, but the judgment of heaven is even greater. To ignore the suffering of others is to invite suffering upon oneself. When the foundations of justice are shaken, when the righteous are silenced and the wicked exalted, the entire structure of a nation becomes unstable. It is not enough to speak of justice. It must be enacted. It is not enough to acknowledge injustice. It must be confronted. The weight of leadership demands a response, not in words alone, but in action. A nation that refuses to listen to the cries of the oppressed will one day find itself crying out for mercy, only to realize that it has long since rejected the very thing it now seeks. Power is fleeting, a vapor that rises in the morning and vanishes before the setting sun. It is an illusion to believe that authority lasts forever, that influence remains unchallenged, or that any man can secure his position indefinitely. History is filled with the ruins of empires and the names of rulers who once stood invincible, only to be brought low by the passing of time and the weight of their own choices. No throne, no title, no government stands unshaken when it drifts from the foundations of truth and justice. The rise and fall of leaders is not determined solely by political strategy or human ambition, but by a greater reality, one that operates beyond the reach of earthly power. Leadership is a trust, not a possession. It is given for a season, not owned for eternity. Those who hold positions of influence must recognize that they are stewards, not masters of the authority entrusted to them. Every decision made, every law enacted, every promise spoken is weighed not only by the people, but by history itself. And history does not forget. Those who misuse their authority, who wield power for selfish gain rather than righteous purpose, will see their legacies crumble like dust in the wind. The greatest rulers are not those who amass wealth or command vast armies, but those who understand the sacred duty of leadership, the call to serve rather than be served, to build rather than destroy, to stand for truth even when it is inconvenient. The illusion of permanence is the downfall of many who rise to power. They believe that because they hold influence today, they will hold it tomorrow. They trust in their alliances, their wealth, their ability to manipulate events in their favor. But power is not kept by force alone. It is not sustained by strategy or secured by political maneuvering. It is upheld by righteousness, by integrity, by a commitment to principles greater than personal ambition. The moment a leader believes he is above accountability, the moment he begins to serve his own interests rather than the good of the people, the seeds of his own downfall are planted. Nations that place their trust in human power alone soon find themselves adrift. When the foundations of leadership shift from truth to expediency, when moral conviction is sacrificed for temporary advantage, the strength of a nation begins to erode from within. Power without righteousness is a snare, a burden too great to bear. Those who seek to secure their positions by any means necessary will find that the very methods they use to maintain control will ultimately be their undoing. Deception, oppression, and corruption may succeed for a time, but they carry within them the certainty of collapse. Eternity weighs heavier than the moment. The decisions made in the corridors of power do not disappear when the term of office ends, nor are they erased when the applause fades. Every law enacted, every policy implemented, every decree issued is written into the record of history, but more importantly, it is written into eternity. Leadership is not measured by the size of a nation's economy, the strength of its military, or the influence it wields on the global stage. It is measured by the condition of its people, by the way the weak are treated, by the integrity with which authority is exercised. Those who lead without this understanding are not merely gambling with their own reputations, but with the destiny of an entire people. The test of leadership is not found in moments of peace, but in times of crisis. When a nation faces hardship, when the people are divided, when the weight of governance becomes too great to bear, the true character of a leader is revealed. Some will cling to power at any cost, seeking to silence opposition and crush dissent. Others will recognize the limits of their own strength and seek wisdom beyond themselves. The difference between a leader who stands the test of time and one who is swept away by it is found in this: whether they acknowledge the fleeting nature of power and submit themselves to a higher standard, or whether they believe they alone can shape the future by their own hand. Trust is fragile, a delicate thread that binds a nation to its leaders. A bond that once broken is difficult to restore. It is not given lightly, nor is it maintained through words alone. Trust is built over time, tested in moments of crisis, and proven through consistency, integrity, and the unwavering commitment to truth. When leaders betray that trust, when they prioritize power over principle, when they speak one thing and do another, the foundation of a nation begins to weaken. The people may listen for a time, they may hope for change, they may extend patience, but there is a limit to how long trust can endure when it is continually disregarded. A nation's strength is not found in its military, its economy, or its political institutions alone, but in the confidence of its people. When that confidence is shaken, when the people begin to doubt the sincerity of those in power, instability follows. It is not enough to speak of unity while sowing division. It is not enough to promise justice while allowing corruption to fester. The words of a leader only hold meaning when they are matched by action. Empty promises, shifting narratives, and the erosion of accountability do not go unnoticed. The people see, they hear, they remember. Deception, once uncovered, does not merely wound trust, it destroys it. A leader may attempt to explain, to justify, to reframe the past, but once trust is broken, words alone cannot mend it. A nation that no longer trusts its leaders becomes a nation divided, suspicious, uncertain of its future. When truth is treated as flexible, when facts are distorted to fit an agenda, when those in power believe they can manipulate perception without consequence, the very structure of governance becomes unstable. The consequences of such deception are not immediate, but they are inevitable. The erosion of trust does not happen all at once. It begins in small compromises, in moments where convenience is chosen over integrity, where difficult truths are avoided for the sake of maintaining control. It grows in the shadows, as promises go unfulfilled, as injustices are ignored, as the powerful shield themselves from the consequences that others must bear. The people may not always react immediately, but they are watching. And when the moment comes, when the weight of broken trust becomes too great to bear, the response is swift and unrelenting. A leader who understands the fragility of trust governs with humility. He does not seek to control perception, but to align himself with truth, even when it is uncomfortable. He does not demand loyalty without first proving himself worthy of it. He recognizes that leadership is not a right, but a responsibility, that authority is not to be wielded for personal gain, but for the good of those he serves. He does not take for granted the faith that people place in him, nor does he dismiss their concerns when they begin to waver. When trust is broken, it cannot be repaired through speeches or declarations. It requires repentance, a change in course, a willingness to acknowledge failure and correct it. It requires transparency, accountability, and the courage to admit when wrongs have been committed. A leader who refuses to do so only deepens the divide, creating an ever-growing chasm between himself and those he was called to serve. A nation cannot function when trust is absent. A government cannot govern when the people no longer believe in its integrity. A leader cannot lead when his words are met with doubt and suspicion. The illusion of control may last for a time, but in the end, truth prevails. The people will follow a leader they trust, even through hardship, even through sacrifice. But they will not follow one who has betrayed them, one who has spoken in half-truths, one who has placed his own interests above the good of the nation. The loss of trust is not merely a political problem. It is a moral one. And once it is lost, the road back is long and uncertain. Truth is not a matter of convenience, nor is it subject to the shifting tides of political necessity. It stands immutable, unshaken by opinion polls or the fleeting winds of public favor. The test of leadership is not found in the ability to craft compelling narratives, but in the willingness to stand by truth even when it is unpopular, even when it costs something. A leader's true measure is revealed not in moments of ease, but in the crucible of decision. When faced with a choice between comfort and conviction, between what is easy and what is right. History is filled with leaders who chose comfort over truth, who compromised principles for temporary security, who silenced inconvenient realities to maintain power. The pattern is always the same. At first, small compromises seem harmless, even strategic. A word left unsaid here, a truth softened there, an uncomfortable reality ignored in favor of political expediency. Over time, these small compromises accumulate, and soon, truth itself is no longer the foundation, but an obstacle to be managed, a liability to be contained. When this happens, leadership becomes hollow, guided not by principle, but by fear. Fear of losing power, fear of losing control, fear of facing the consequences of past deceptions. A leader who values truth over comfort does not shift with the changing political landscape. He does not mold his words to fit the expectations of those who seek to manipulate him. He does not measure his success by applause, but by the weight of his integrity. Truth is not his servant bent to his will, but his master to whom he submits without hesitation. Such a leader understands that real strength is not found in the ability to maintain an illusion, but in the courage to face reality, no matter how difficult or costly it may be. When truth is sacrificed for the sake of maintaining control, the result is not stability, but decay. A society that embraces deception at its highest levels soon finds itself unable to distinguish right from wrong, justice from injustice, freedom from tyranny. When leaders prioritize what is comfortable over what is true, they create a culture where deception becomes normalized, where half-truths become acceptable, and where the people are conditioned to expect nothing more than carefully crafted illusions. This is the beginning of decline, for a nation that abandons truth has already begun to crumble from within. Those who build their leadership on comfort rather than truth believe they can control the consequences of their choices. They believe that if they manage perception well enough, if they control the flow of information tightly enough, they can avoid accountability indefinitely. But the nature of truth is that it cannot be hidden forever. No matter how carefully a deception is crafted, no matter how tightly it is guarded, it will eventually be exposed. And when it is, the consequences are far greater than if the truth had been faced from the beginning. The people are not blind. They may be patient. They may endure much, but they are not without discernment. They recognize when they are being lied to. They understand when their trust is being manipulated. And while they may tolerate falsehoods for a time, eventually a moment comes when they demand accountability. The leader who has built his authority on comfort rather than truth will find himself without a foundation when that moment arrives. No speech, no carefully curated statement, no attempt to shift blame will restore the trust that was lost through deception. True leadership does not seek the easiest path, nor does it avoid the weight of difficult truths. It embraces the responsibility of speaking what is right, even when it is costly. It refuses to trade integrity for temporary approval. It understands that the measure of success is not in how long power is maintained, but in how faithfully truth is upheld. Comfort fades, illusions shatter, but truth endures. Those who stand upon it will find themselves unshaken, no matter what storms may come. Those who reject it will find that in the end, the very comfort they sought to protect was nothing more than a fleeting shadow. A nation's destiny is not written by chance, but by the choices of those who lead it. The decisions made in moments of power determine the course of history, shaping the lives of millions and setting in motion events that cannot be undone. Leadership is not merely a position, it is a weight, a responsibility that demands wisdom, discernment, and humility. The path of a leader is not one of personal ambition or self-preservation, but of service, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to righteousness. A nation does not rise by the strength of its economy alone, nor does it fall merely by external threats. The true strength or weakness of a nation is found in its moral foundation, in the character of those who guide it, in the values it upholds when faced with trial. Every civilization that has endured throughout history has done so not merely because of military might or economic prosperity, but because it was built upon principles greater than itself. When a nation abandons those principles, when it forsakes justice, when it turns away from truth, it does not need an enemy to bring about its downfall. It will collapse under the weight of its own corruption. Leadership is a sacred trust given for a time, entrusted to individuals who must recognize that they are but stewards of something greater than themselves. The power they wield is not for personal gain, nor is it to be used to manipulate, oppress, or control. It is given for the good of the people, for the preservation of what is right, for the defense of those who cannot defend themselves. When leadership forgets this, when it becomes consumed with self-preservation rather than self-sacrifice, the consequences are severe. History has shown that nations do not fall in a single moment. Their collapse is not sudden, but gradual, the result of years of compromise, of small decisions that erode the foundations upon which they were built. It begins when truth is no longer honored, when justice is no longer impartial, when the law is wielded as a weapon against the weak rather than a shield for the innocent. It continues when leaders prioritize their own security over the needs of the people, when they silence opposition rather than engage with it, when they believe that their position makes them immune to the accountability of history and heaven. Such nations do not need an external enemy to bring about their ruin. They are undone from within. The strength of a leader is not found in his ability to command, but in his willingness to listen. It is not demonstrated in how well he controls those beneath him, but in how faithfully he serves those entrusted to his care. The greatest leaders are not those who seek to establish their own legacy, but those who lay down their pride for the sake of something greater. Power does not grant wisdom. It only reveals the character of the one who holds it. A leader who governs with fear will eventually find himself ruled by it. A leader who builds his authority on deception will one day be undone by the truth he tried to suppress. A leader who prioritizes self-preservation over the well-being of the people will one day look around and realize that he stands alone. A nation's future is determined not by the promises of its leaders, but by the actions they take when no one is watching. Righteousness exalts a nation, but corruption tears it down. It is not the speeches, the policies, or the carefully crafted public statements that determine the course of history, but the quiet decisions made behind closed doors. The test of leadership is not found in how well a man presents himself before the world, but in what he chooses to do when faced with a decision that will cost him something. Does he stand for truth even when it is costly? Does he protect the weak even when it is unpopular? Does he govern with justice even when it means standing against those who once supported him? No leader is beyond accountability. No government is exempt from the laws of justice and truth. No nation is invincible when it turns away from righteousness. The rise and fall of nations are not dictated by human strategy alone, but by the principles upon which they stand. A leader who forgets this, who believes that power alone can sustain him, who ignores the weight of history and the judgment of heaven, will find that his rule, no matter how secure it may seem today, is nothing more than a momentary illusion. Thanks for watching.